At the Skagit County Commissioners meeting on May 30th, 2023, the three county commissioners authorized a resolution to abate a public nuisance at a property owned by Larry Jensen, co-owner of Tulip Valley Farms. During the authorization of this resolution against Jensen, the three commissioners and Chief Civil Attorney Will Honey made a point to talk about Skagit County's code enforcement procedures and the necessity of a request for investigation to avoid unfair treatment.
I think it is important when people see actions against themselves, their neighbors, that they get to see it in this public forum and have some sense of the why. And that it's not just, people being picked on. Sometimes our citizens accuse me as a commissioner of just picking on them when we enforce code. So I appreciate the process.
Thank you.
Can you go over that process a little bit on how we have to have a complaint from somebody and then code enforcement officers look at it and talk to them and try to get resolution, and then at some point we come up here, right?
Yeah, well,
It's
that's a good, I think a good thing to remind folks of from time to time. There's competing tension here. We want to make sure that we are enforcing our code, not let situations get out of control, not let it become the case that we have laws that are just broadly unenforced. At the same time, there's a bit of a concern, and it's a real one, that one might have an employee of you all roaming the county looking for people violating code. And that historically, not here, I'm not pointing fingers at anybody now or in the past, but historically that, in other places, it's given rise to a problem of selective enforcement. Who has the favor of the board doesn't get enforced on, and who doesn't have the favor of the board gets enforced on. And so the way that tension is dealt with and balanced is a complaint-based code enforcement system, so that our code enforcement folks, they're located in the planning department. Both of our code enforcement folks are retired law enforcement officers, so they really do understand the limits on the government's ability to intrude on people's private property, but and hew to that, but also have a lot of skills that carry over, and they're very, very good at their job. But they don't go out and actively look for problems. They investigate when a citizen or a business, I suppose, could do this, files a complaint with the county and says, this is a concern. We believe, I believe this is a violation of the law and county code. And then and only then do they go out and investigate. And so, again, what that does is balances the concern that we want to enforce our code, but that we don't want to have essentially employees, agents of the government out looking for problems.
This complaint-based system is supposed to ensure that there is no unfair treatment under the law. Yet in response to public records requests, Code Enforcement Officer Tom Wenzel admitted that the code violations against Jensen were sparked by an internal complaint from Planning and Development Services. Further records requests identified that this internal complaint came more specifically from the Fire Marshal's Department. But when requests were made to find out exactly who within the Fire Marshal's Department made the complaint, Tom Wenzel claimed that the communication was verbal and that there was no identifiable record regarding this information. How can the government rule out unfair treatment under the law when their own system that is based on requests for investigation is being circumvented, and investigations are instead being initiated based on internal complaints with no documented origin? This initial internal complaint with no documented origin then sparked the county to cite Mr. Larry Jensen for a laundry list of violations based on the lack of permitting for grade and fill, access and egress, events, and the conversion of agricultural land. Yet Mr. Jensen and Tulip Valley Farms' two biggest competitors within a 1-mile radius, Tulip Town and Rosengard, have also failed to get the same types of permitting for their even larger operations. This has been proven through Skagit County records requests. Mr. Jensen's property has approximately 877 feet of pre-existing impervious access road. Tulip Town has constructed 3,684 feet of impervious roads, and Rosengard has constructed approximately 20,391 feet of impervious roads. and neither company has acquired any grade and fill permits. Mr. Jensen has 2 pre-existing points of access and egress on his property, connecting to Bradshaw Road to the west. Tulip Town has 3 points of access and egress. That's not including a residential driveway at the furthest north access point. Skagit County failed to respond to a records request for Tulip Town's access and egress permits on file. Rosengard has an estimated 14 points of access and egress, not including residential driveways. Through records requests, it was determined that Rosengard has no access and egress permits on file. Mr. Jensen temporarily converts approximately 7 acres into parking and facilities for 1 month a year during the Tulip Festival. Tulip Town has converted 13.8 acres of agricultural land, most of which is untillable and cannot be reconverted back into agricultural land, not to mention all of the buildings they have erected on the property. Rosengard has converted 34.6 acres of agricultural land for parking, buildings, and retail spaces, most of which cannot be easily reconverted back into agricultural land. And this isn't the first time Mr. Jensen has been treated unfairly by Skagit County Code Enforcement. Back in 2022, Code Enforcement Officer Tom Wenzel cited Mr. Jensen for the shipping containers on his farm on Young Road, claiming that they were buildings and needed permits. Yet over 200 examples have been gathered of other shipping containers throughout the county that don't have permits. These books are available for viewing. There are many examples of Mr. Jensen being targeted by the county. Jensen seems to be the only tulip grower that requires an event permit, and the only tulip grower to require permits for access and egress, grade and fill, and ag land conversion.
And that it's not just, people being picked on. Sometimes our citizens accuse me as a commissioner of just picking on them when we enforce code. So I appreciate the process.
But they don't go out and actively look for problems. They investigate when a citizen or a business, I suppose, could do this, files a complaint with the county. And then and only then do they go out and investigate.
On March 25th, 2024, Larry Jensen attended a county commissioners meeting to express this unfair treatment and targeting.
The assistant district attorney and the commissioner said that I had requests for investigations by community members for some complaints. This was not true. There were no community complaints as discovered by researcher Jamie Crawford, but rather the complaint came from county staff. The county targeted me.
Will Honey then responded to Jensen's comments.
At the hearing where we proposed a resolution after significant discussion with code enforcement in an executive session, what I mentioned was that our code enforcement officials do not themselves initiate complaints. That is all I said, and I would sincerely appreciate if this slanderous business stopped, Mr. Jensen.
In this statement, Honey tried to narrow the scope of his past claims. Here he stated that at the May 30th, 2023 meeting, the only thing he was trying to convey was that code enforcement officers themselves don't initiate complaints. But this is an attempt to rewrite history. At that meeting, Honey did convey that code enforcement officials themselves don't initiate complaints, but he immediately goes on to say that the county receives complaints by citizens, and then and only then does code enforcement take action.
But they don't go out and actively look for problems. They investigate when a citizen or a business, I suppose, could do this, files a complaint with the county and says this is a concern. We believe, I believe this is a violation of the law and county code. And then and only then do they go out and investigate.
What I mentioned was that our code enforcement officials do not themselves initiate complaints. That is all I said, and I would sincerely appreciate if this slanderous business stopped, Mr. Jensen.
But, here's the point. Now we can have a calm and rational community conversation.
He also very clearly illustrates that this complaint-based system is not only supposed to prevent unfair treatment from code enforcement officers, but it is supposed to prevent unfair treatment from the Board of County Commissioners themselves.
Historically, that, in other places, it's given rise to a problem of selective enforcement. Who has the favor of the board doesn't get enforced on, and who doesn't have the favor of the board gets enforced on.
What I mentioned was that our code enforcement officials do not themselves initiate complaints. That is all I said, and I would sincerely appreciate if this slanderous business stopped, Mr. Jensen.
Why is Honey backtracking on the larger discussion that was had at this initial meeting? Mr. Jensen has been threatened with a fine of $1,000 per day since April of 2020 and a year of jail time, all for doing the same things his competitors have been doing for many years. This is a case of unfair treatment in its most egregious form and should not be left unnoticed by the community.